All right, let's take a journey into the mind of one of history's most fascinating thinkers, René Descartes. This was a man on a mission, a quest for absolute, rock-solid certainty. He wanted to rebuild all of human knowledge on a foundation that could never, ever be shaken. And to do that, well, he realized he first had to tear everything down. And this is the question that just drove him nuts. I mean, think about it. The chair you're sitting in, the device you're watching this on, even your own hands. How do you know with 100% certainty that any of it is real? How do you know you're not in some incredibly vivid dream? This is where Descartes begins his entire project.
So Descartes' first move was, well, it was pretty radical. He decided he was going to systematically doubt every single thing he had ever learned, everything his senses told him, until he could find just one thing that was completely impossible to doubt.
I mean, can you picture it? Him sitting there in his famous stove-heated room, just trying to find a starting point for reality. He questioned it all. What if his eyes are lying to him? What if this feeling of warmth isn't real? What if my own body is an illusion? He needed to find a truth so fundamental that no amount of doubt could possibly erode it. And this process of intense doubt led him to his first major aha moment. He realized that some knowledge doesn't come from our senses at all, which he'd already decided were unreliable. No, some truths come from pure, abstract reason alone. Now, this move planted Descartes firmly on one side of a massive philosophical debate. He totally rejected empiricism. That's the idea that all knowledge comes from what we see, hear, and touch. Instead, he championed rationalism, the belief that the most important fundamental truths are discovered just by using logic and reason. And the key to this whole rationalist idea is something called a priori knowledge. Basically, it's stuff you can know is true just by thinking about it. You don't need to go out into the world and run an experiment or see it with your own eyes. It's true from the get-go. To make this idea crystal clear, Descartes used a really simple but brilliant example that you don't need any of your senses for. The simple idea of a triangle. Think about it. You don't need to see or touch a real-world triangle to know these things are true. They are necessary truths that are just baked into the definition of a triangle. Its angles have to add up to 180 degrees. Otherwise, it just isn't a triangle. It exists as a perfect thought object, and its truth is guaranteed by pure logic, not by experience. Okay, so now that he's armed with this powerful tool of pure reason, Descartes decides to aim it at the biggest concept of them all. He's going to apply this exact same logical method to try and prove the existence of God. And this is his famous ontological argument. It's a pure logic puzzle. So, step 1, he starts with the fact that he can conceive of a supremely perfect being. Step 2, he reasons that a perfect being, by definition, must have all perfections. Step 3, and this is the crucial move, he argues that existence itself is a perfection. It's better to exist than to not exist. And so his conclusion, the very idea of a perfect being logically requires that this being must actually exist. Descartes came up with this brilliant analogy to drive the point home. He said you can't think of a mountain without also implicitly thinking of a valley. The two ideas are inseparable. In the same way, he argued, you can't think of a supremely perfect being that lacks the perfection of existence. The idea itself guarantees the reality. So you might be wondering, why go through all this trouble? Well, here's the payoff for Descartes. He reasons that a perfect being wouldn't be a deceiver. A perfect God wouldn't create him with a mind that is designed to be tricked. So this proof of God acts as a kind of divine guarantee. It means that whenever he has a clear and distinct idea, like a mathematical truth, he can now trust it completely. Okay, so with his reason now guaranteed by a non-deceiving God, Descartes could finally circle back to the problem that kicked this whole thing off, proving that his own body and the physical world around him actually exist. To get there, he started by analyzing the different kinds of ideas he found in his mind. First, there's conception, like the abstract idea of matter. That only proves matter is logically possible, not that it's real. Then there's imagination, like picturing a blue cat. That's voluntary, so it doesn't prove anything about reality. But then there was sensation, an involuntary feeling, like a sudden pain in your toe. That felt different. That felt like it was coming from outside of him. And this becomes his proof. He reasons, look, I feel this pain. It is totally involuntary. My mind isn't choosing to create it. And since I now know a perfect God exists who wouldn't deceive me,
these feelings can't just be a divine trick, therefore they must be caused by something real. And that something is my physical body. He's done it. He's proven he's not just a mind floating in a void. But here's the incredible twist. In solving one problem, Descartes created a brand new one. A problem so profound it has haunted philosophy ever since, and one we still wrestle with today in fields like AI and neuroscience. It's the famous mind-body problem. See, what Descartes ended up with was a universe made of two completely, fundamentally different kinds of stuff. On one hand, you have the mind, which is a non-physical thinking thing. On the other, you have the body, a physical, extended thing that takes up space. And the key here is that they have absolutely nothing in common. Which leads us to the giant, unavoidable question. If the mind is non-physical and the body is physical, and they share no properties, then how on earth do they interact? How can a non-physical thought like, I want to raise my arm, cause your physical arm to actually move? Now, Descartes actually had an answer, or at least he tried to. He pointed to the pineal gland, this tiny, single gland located deep in the center of the brain. He figured this must be the special meeting point, the one place where the immaterial soul could touch the physical body and direct what he called animal spirits to move the muscles. But this is what many philosophers call a classic goof. Why? Well, for one, the pineal gland is still a physical thing. So he hasn't solved the problem of how the non-physical interacts with the physical. He's just moved the problem to a much smaller location. And more importantly, it totally fails to explain our actual experience. We don't feel like a mind piloting a separate body. We feel like one unified person. Descartes left this huge puzzle behind, and later philosophers came up with some really wild theories to try and solve it. You had ideas like occasionalism, where God has to personally step in every single time you want to move. Or double aspect theory, which says mind and body are just two sides of the same coin. And then there's pre-established harmony, the idea that God wound up the mind and body like two perfect clocks at the beginning of time so they'd always run in perfect sync without ever actually touching. So in the end, Descartes' heroic quest for certainty gave us this incredible framework for thinking, but it also left us with this deeply personal and honestly kinda unsettling question. He proved he had a mind and he proved he had a body, but by splitting them so completely, he forces every one of us to ask ourselves, what exactly is the connection between our inner thoughts and our physical selves? Are we, when it comes right down to it, just a ghost driving a machine?